In Nigeria, the American pharmaceutical giant Pfizer arrived in the city of Kano during a deadly meningitis outbreak in 1996. Desperate parents brought their children to what they believed was a relief camp, a place of hope. Instead, it became a testing ground. Pfizer's team administered an experimental antibiotic called Trovan. Children were given the drug without parental consent, without full explanation, and without proper oversight. 11 of them died. Dozen more were left blind, deaf, or brain damaged. Pfizer denied wrongdoing, but quietly settled with the families years later, paying $75 million to resolve the case. But this was not the first dark medical trial on African bodies. It was simply one of the few that reached the headlines. For more than a century, Africa has been the laboratory of the world, a continent where experiments are done to us, not for us. Where medicine was used not only to heal, but to dominate, control, and collect data. By the end of today's episode, I want to walk you through some of these stories. From Namibia, where German doctors shipped the skulls of murdered Africans to Europe for racial science, where African bones were used to prove that white people are more superior to black people, to Uganda, where British scientists injected villagers with toxic arsenic compounds that blinded them in the name of curing sleeping sickness. Then we'll go to South Africa, where apartheid laboratories researched drugs that could sterilize black women without their consent, and to the modern era, where vaccine and drug trials still take place on African soil, but the patents and profits never stay here. Because this episode is not just about the past, it's about what Africa keeps failing to learn. Even after decades of being the testing ground of the world, Africa still does not own the laboratories, the patents, or the data that shapes its health. We keep providing the bodies, the skulls, and other people keep writing the science. Now, to understand how this began, we have to go back to the late 1800s, when medicine, mission work, and empire all spoke the same language: civilization. Europe wasn't coming to learn from Africa. It was coming to study Africa. When European explorers and missionaries came to Africa, they carried two things. You all know the Bible and a medical kit. The missionary preached salvation. The doctors collected samples, and from the very beginning, the line between healing and experimenting was blurred. They said they came to fight the tropical diseases, but if you look closely, those diseases mostly threatened who? Them, not us. They wanted cures for the fevers that killed their soldiers, the parasites that weakened their traders, and the infections that made their missionaries abandon their posts. So when they built hospitals, they did not put them in our villages. No, they did not. Actually, look closely. You will see that hospitals were built near the mines, the ports, and the railway lines, where European workers stayed. What they called primitive or witchcraft was in fact our own science. Knowledge passed down for generations and generations. Our people already had ways to treat malaria, stomach upsets, wounds, and even fevers. Plants like bitter leaf in West Africa, African wormwood in the south, and wabagia in East Africa had strong healing power. The same plants that modern laboratories today used to make expensive drugs were called primitive. You know, our ancestors might not have worn the white coats, but they understood the human body and the land better than any visitor ever could. Even before Europe discovered vaccines, some African communities were already protecting themselves. In parts of West Africa, healers practiced a form of smallpox immunization by exposing people to a mild version of the virus so they could build resistance. When that idea reached America through an enslaved African named Onesimus in 1721, it saved hundreds of lives and inspired the same technique that Europe later claimed as its own discovery. Guys, Africa, we already had it. We were not waiting to be civilized. We were already civilized. We had our own doctors, midwives, and healers. People who understood balance between the body, nature, and spirit. But when the colonizers arrived, they refused to acknowledge this. They dismissed our knowledge as superstition and made our bodies their experiments. And now they are making a killing using our own herbs. And the truth is this: colonial medicine was not built to save or serve the African farmer or mother. It was built to protect the Europe Empire. And when they needed someone to test a new drug or measure a reaction, the African became the easiest target. No questions asked, no consent needed, and no one to hold them accountable. That is how Africa quietly became the testing ground for the world. A pattern that started in the name of curing tropical diseases, but ended up spreading something much worse. A belief that African lives could be experimented on without consequence. I keep asking, how did our ancestors survive these people? How did they survive? But let me take you back to the 1900s. What is today Namibia was under German colonial rule, right? And there, something happened that history books rarely teach. The first genocide of the 20th century. After the Herero and Nama people rebelled against the German occupation, the colonial army launched a campaign to wipe them out completely. Hundreds of thousands were killed, men, women, and children, either shot, starved in the desert, or forced into concentration camps. According to the United Nations, Namibian government records and German historical archives, historians estimate that 80% of the Herero population and 50% of the Nama people died. And this makes it the first officially recognized genocide of the 20th century. Did they teach you that? Or they just taught you about Hitler? They never taught us about what affected us, Like, I'm an African person here in Kenya, and I'm coming to learn about these things later on. But I knew who Adolf Hitler was. I knew all these things. But I was not made aware of what happened even in Namibia. Because of this, even Germany's own parliament formally acknowledged it as genocide in 2021, after more than a century of denial. They only acknowledged it as a genocide in 2021 as if it's a favor. Anyways, back to the deaths. The horrors did not stop with these concentration camps. German doctors and scientists turned those bodies into research material. One of them was Dr. Eugene Fischer, a man who later inspired Adolf Hitler's racial policies in Europe. So when they were teaching us about Hitler, why did they not tell us that what they were doing to people in Namibia actually inspired Hitler to do what he did? This doctor and his team collected skulls, skeletons, and even preserved organs from murdered Africans and shipped them to the universities in Germany. There, students were taught to measure skulls, study our noses, and compare our bones, just to prove that Africans were biologically inferior. Can you imagine that? Your ancestors' head on a laboratory table in Germany, used as evidence that you were less than human. And this was not hidden work. This was published, funded, and praised in Europe as science. And soon, we must actually look at the dangers of this science to Africa. Because these experiments became the foundation of eugenics. And this is the dangerous idea that one race is naturally superior to another. And decades later, those same theories helped justify what? The Holocaust. So in many ways, Africa was the testing ground, The concentration camps in Namibia were actually the testing grounds. And this was not for medicine, but for the twisted science of racism itself and colonialism. More than a century later, Germany quietly returned some of those skulls to Namibia. But what they can never return is the dignity that was stolen when African humanity was turned into laboratory evidence. What makes this story even more painful is that this was done under the language of research and progress. You know, they said they were studying human biology, but behind every study, there was a system built on violence, exploitation, and greed, where death itself became a scientific opportunity. And then, once Europe learned that Africa could be used that way, as a place where anything could be tested and no one would be punished, the habit stuck. And that is how it started, not with a vaccine, but with an ideology that African lives could be used as advanced Western knowledge. What a shame. What a shame. But while Germany was running its empire in Namibia, another European king was running his own private kingdom in Central Africa. We spoke about this guy, King Leopold II of Belgium. And you remember we said he did not rule the Congo as a colony. He ruled it as his personal business. He called Congo what? From our last conversation, a free state. But there was nothing free about it. Because behind the fancy titles of civilization and Christian duty, there was a system built entirely on blood and profit. Leopold's men forced who? Millions of Africans to collect rubber for export. If a village did not meet its quota, soldiers chopped off hands as punishment, proof that they used the bullets wisely. Go and check the whole episode on the exploitation of Congo. All those details are there. But while this brutality was happening in the open, another cruelty was happening quietly in the name of medicine. They are not just chopping your hand. Something else is happening. Europe was obsessed with a disease called sleeping sickness, which was spreading through Central Africa at the time. Colonial doctors wanted to find a cure quickly, not because they cared about African lives, but because the disease was affecting workers in the rubber plantations and the soldiers guarding trade routes. If laborers were too sick to work, the empire lost money, so we gotta find a cure for these people. And so they began to experiment. Here, doctors used a chemical called a toxide, made from arsenic, the same poison used to kill rats. They injected it into thousands of Africans to see what doses might help. But you know, a toxin was extremely toxic. People lost their sight, suffered nerve damage, and many died from the so-called treatment itself. Reports show that when side effects appeared, the trials did not stop. They just changed locations or moved on to the new test groups. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? They can see it's not working. People are dying, but can we go to a location we've not done this in? See now what will happen? They knew what they were doing. Because to colonial authorities, those deaths were not tragedies, they were statistics. And this hypocrisy was stunning. Europe called this again tropical medicine, as if they were doing Africa a favor. But the truth is this: they were testing drugs that would never have been allowed on European citizens. Africans had become the perfect laboratories because we didn't have lawyers, we didn't have reporters, there were no rules, no protection. We were left bare in the open. Because even the way these medical teams traveled tells you everything. Why would a medical team move with guards and guns? Why not move with nurses and medicine? People were rounded up for treatment, sometimes by force. Entire villages were marked as infected zones, and anyone inside was injected whether they wanted it or not. You don't get to have a choice, my friend. So, while the world celebrated scientific progress, Africa was living through chemical violence dressed up as research. And that pattern of experimenting first and asking permission later did not end there. It simply evolved. By the 1920s and 1930s, the same logic spread across Uganda and Congo under Belgian rule. When new drugs or vaccines arrived from Europe, Africans were first to be injected and the last to be informed. Colonial medicine was never neutral. It was part of the machine. The same machine that used the Bible to justify conquest and science to justify control. Because in the end, the purpose was not to heal Africans. It was to make sure Africa could keep working for them. We need you healthy so that you can be able to keep working for us. Same case with Uganda. In 1900, the same sleeping sickness was spreading. To the British, just like we saw with Belgium, the main concern was not that Africans were dying. It was that their workers, soldiers, and porters were dying. So they launched what they call a treatment campaign. And at the center of it were two men, Dr. Aldo Castellani, an Italian working for the British, and Dr. Robert Koch. He's really famous, this Robert Koch. He's a famous German scientist. And they both wanted to be the first to find a cure. And then Uganda became their laboratory. The drug they used was called atoxy, the same arsenic-based chemical already tested in the Congo. It was poison, but they believed that in small doses, it could kill the parasite causing sleeping sickness. So they started injecting it into African patients, often without clear information or consent. And what followed was very devastating. Just like Congo, people began to lose their eyesight one by one. Some went blind overnight. Others screamed in pain from nerve damage. You had whole communities that were left scarred. You know, Dr. Koch himself recorded at least 22 cases of blindness in a single experiment. Single experiment. 22 people already went blind in a single experiment. But instead of stopping, he continued. Why? Because to him, everybody was data. Every African who suffered was a number in his notebook. Another step towards, you know what, a paper he could publish in Europe and maybe win the Nobel Peace Prize. And those papers did make it to Europe. They were celebrated by same universities that built the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. What was a tragedy in Uganda became a scientific milestone in London. And no one was punished. No one paid compensation. No one. And those who lost their sight were simply left to die in silence. Imagine the irony. A campaign that came to save lives ended up blinding thousands. A medicine that was supposed to cure disease ended up spreading lifelong disability. And all this was done in the name of progress, in the name of science, in the name of medicine. The British called it a success because it produced data. But the people of Uganda remember it as something else. They call it the blinding cure. And that word, that title there, the blinding cure, says it all. The cure was more dangerous than the disease. And what makes this even sadder is that it did not stop there. When other colonial doctors saw what happened, they did not ban the drug. They simply carried the same experiments to new regions. We are talking about East Africa, Central Africa, and the French colonies. They changed nothing except the victims. Because when the empire decided to test, an African life did not count as a loss. It just counted as research. Anyway, when the flags of empire finally came down, you would think the story of medical abuse would end. I mean, don't do this to us anymore. Don't test us. Leave our skulls alone. Leave us alone. But no, it did not change. It simply changed the costume. The white coats stayed. Only now they called themselves partners, researchers, and donors. You see how this works? Colonial rule had taught Europe and America one powerful lesson, that Africa was the perfect place to test ideas, drugs, and systems without resistance. And that lesson survived independence. It did. You see, when the colonizers left, they did not leave behind the laboratories, factories, or research institutions. No, they did not. That maybe would have been a bit strong to serve Africa. But instead, what we inherited, and we still inherit until today, was dependency. We became consumers of foreign cures, and subjects of foreign studies. Our universities are still underfunded, our scientists are still underpaid, and our policies are still being written with donor money. And so, when Western pharmaceutical companies came calling, offering collaborations and clinical trials, many African governments saw it as a partnership, not as history repeating itself. And we know how African presidents love these donations. We know how much they love these donations. They will sell us for $1 billion. Right now, someone is selling our whole ecosystem for 140 million Kenya shillings. The pattern is always the same. The patents are registered there and the profits keep going there. And Africans once again became the sample group, not the shareholders of their own health. In 1996, Nigeria was battling one of the worst meningitis outbreaks in history. Over 100,000 people were infected, mostly children. In the middle of that chaos arrived one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies, PHISER. They set up a tent in the city of Kano, promising a miracle drug called Trovan. Now, to desperate parents, this sounds like hope. I mean, it definitely sounded like hope. But what they did not know was that Trovan was still experimental. Children were divided into two groups, one given Trovan, the other an existing antibiotic. There was no proper consent, no clear explanation, and no official ethics approval from the Nigerian authorities. When some children died and others were left blind or brain damaged, the outcry was massive. PHISER denied wrongdoing, saying they were helping during a crisis. There is a crisis in Africa and PHISER, the first people to come and help you guys. How generous. But internal reports and leaked documents later showed that the ethics approval letter had been backdated, forged after the fact. Years later, PHISER quietly settled out of court with the families and the Kano state government. I was watching a video Al Jazeera did like 15 years ago on this, and it's painful to see those children, because the damage has already been done. It was not just about the deaths. It was about what it revealed, that in 1996, in an independent African country, the West still saw African lives as a testing ground. And the same story repeated during the HIV/AIDS crisis of the 1980s and the 1990s. Western researchers tested new drugs on African populations. Sometimes with consent, yes, they will tell you, do we have your consent? Yes, but often without clear understandings. Trials were conducted in Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and yet the patents and profits all went to labs abroad. Even today, Africa produces less than 2% of the world's medicine, yet it remains home to almost 20% of global clinical trials. Can you imagine that? That imbalance is no accident. It is by design. 20% of trials take place in Africa, and yet even we can't even provide medicine for our own people. No, that is by design. You are the testing ground. Us, we will go with the product, the results, the patents, and make money of you guys. Then we'll ship those drugs back to you, but we used you for experiment. During the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, we are talking about 2014 to 2016, Western labs rushed to test new vaccines. There was panic, there was urgency, and Africa once again became the perfect testing zone. But local doctors later revealed that most of the data and ownership of results stayed in Europe and North America. Even patient consent forms were often written only in English or French, languages many victims could not read. And then came COVID-19. Just the other day, in 2020, 2 French doctors went on live television and casually suggested that vaccine trials should start in Africa because people there don't have masks or intensive care. Actually, this is how the conversation went. If I can be provocative, shouldn't we do this study in Africa where there are no masks, no treatments, no intensive care, like we did for AIDS studies with prostitutes? Hey, This was just 2020. Let us do this in Africa, like we did with the prostitutes for AIDS, you know. Then the other doctor they were with, Dr. Lodged, replied in agreement saying, you know, you are right. We're in the process of thinking about a parallel study in Africa. Yeah. Let us actually test these vaccines to those African people first. They are the ones who are more, you know, endangered. Let us test. This is 2020. 2020. The backlash was immediate and global. African leaders, World Health Organization director, and citizens across the continent condemned the remarks as deeply racist and colonial-minded. It showed that even in 2020, after centuries of exploitation, some Western scientists still instinctively saw Africa as the place to test first and ask later. And today, the system hides behind new names: global health, public-private partnership, aid for development. You know, it's no longer called exploitation, it's called collaboration. But the results are the same. The West keeps the cure. Africa, you just keep the gratitude. Thank you guys for using us to test and see if it worked. We were happy to be of service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In today's world, medicine is not just about saving lives, it's about geopolitics. Whoever controls health controls economies. Whoever produces vaccines controls borders. And Africa, despite centuries of being the testing ground, still sits at the mercy of others for its survival. And that is why during COVID, such people can talk the way they want. Such doctors, such people can actually say what they need to say. African countries, we had to beg for vaccines, you know. The same vaccines whose trials were partly done on African volunteers, but we had to beg. Actually, COVID was a painful reminder. Even when we bleed for science, we don't own the cure, and we never will, unless we open our eyes. So yes, the days of forced injections and blinding poisons might be gone. They will not force us right now. But the system, the structure that made them possible, is still very much alive. After everything we've lived through, from skulls on laboratory tables to vaccine trials in crisis zones, one truth remains: science owes Africa a debt. And I say it proudly. A debt for the lives used to build other people's reputations. People are winning awards because they used us. A debt for the knowledge stolen and rebranded. You took our herbs, you are now using them to make medicine after you told us this is witchcraft. Your ancestors are primitive. A debt for the silence that followed every experiment. Because without Africa, modern medicine would not be what it is today. Our plants, our blood, our data, all these things built the very system that once called us backwards. Yet when the world talks about innovation, Africa's name is rarely in the room. Who are you? And that is not just injustice, that is theft. And it's time Africa stops waiting for others to define what health means for us, you know. Our ancestors healed themselves long before laboratories existed. They understood balance between body and soil, spirit and nature, community and care. And maybe it's time we actually go back. Let us go back. Because we are not going backwards, but we are going back to our roots. To the medicines of our forests, the herbs of our grandmothers, the knowledge of our healers. Because what the world now sells as organic or natural was once ours, our everyday way of life. And this is not about rejecting modern medicine. It is about reclaiming agency. It's about saying we will decide what enters our bodies, our farms, and our future. Our strength does not lie in imitation, but please, cocosity, integration, blending ancient African wisdom with modern science on our terms. And that is how we build a medical system rooted in dignity, not dependency. So the next time help comes, you know, wrapped in good intentions, Once you see the tents, we are here to assist Africa in this crisis. You know, please read the fine print. Because not all help heals. Some help hides control. And sometimes what looks like generosity is just the old empire learning a new accent. We must stay cautious, not fearful, but awake. Because those who experimented on our grandparents now send partnership proposals to our governments, you know. That is what they are doing. Those who ignored our pain now brand themselves as humanitarian saviors. No, Africa, we must learn to say no. Or at least not yet, you know. Say, if we can't say no, say not yet. We are not really sure, you know. Let us understand what your help really means, and then we'll give you feedback. And I love that there's a new generation rising. Here in Nairobi, across Africa, every other place, we have a new generation that is rising. People who are working together to rebuild what colonialism tried to destroy. African trust in African medicine. They destroyed that. They called it witchcraft. And I love that people are now going back to our roots. You are putting those leaves in your tea. You are understanding if I had a small pain in my stomach, there's something my mother would uproot from there and she would give me and I would chew it and I would be okay. And I pray for a day where our labs are led by us, our research is funded by us, our cures are grown from our soil, because the world will finally meet an African that doesn't need saving. So as you finish watching this episode, ask yourself, how many times will we let history repeat itself in a lab coat? How many times will we trust those who have already shown us that their help, you know, looks like this? It looks like experiments. It looks like leaving you blind. It looks like death. We do not need another savior. Africa, listen to me. Go back to your roots. Go back to your leaves. Go back to your food. We do not need a savior. We need sovereignty. Sovereignty in food, science, medicine, and in the mind. Let us go back to our roots, guys. Let us heal with that which we know, you know. Guard what we have and never again confuse exploitation for compassion. They don't love you like you think they do. They don't. Because real healing begins the day Africa stops being a testing ground and becomes the author of its own cure. Let us do that. If someone is still funding a research, then they will dictate the outcome of that research. If people are coming here and they are telling you we are going to do free medical camps, our government loves, by the way, and you know, we have to actually take blame as Africans. We are the ones who elect these people. We elect them, and when they hear we are going to donate $70 million to you guys, they will run for it without asking, what is it these people are actually here for? By the way, we are the ones to blame. We choose useless leaders who do not care about our sovereignty. People who only want us to remain. Imagine something as small as a headache pill. You still need to go by that. Well, our ancestors did that and they knew how to do it. If there's anything this conversation today has taught me, is that we are not yet free. And you will know we are not free because during COVID, we had to beg for vaccine. You see how Africa was treated during COVID? Don't think you'll be treated better if you don't wake up. People will still be treating you like crap because you are making crappy decisions. There are so many things we need to start prioritizing as Africans. Where does our data, you know, because every time these people do what they do, they live with so much data. Even the consent forms, they take them and they make sure there's nothing you can tie them to. When I was watching the Pfizer story in Nigeria, and the parents, some of them were being told, no, there's a document you must have had. And they're like, which one? I was not given. I just took my child. You know, because these women saw hope. There's meningitis here and there's someone who is here to help us. Please always pay attention to these people when they come running during crisis. They know you don't have a choice, and they know it's time for us to hit you, and you will not go and investigate. They know that. So let us go back to our roots. Let's support our researchers. It breaks my heart to know that we have had herbal professors, even in this country, who know no peace. Because the government and the big pharma is scared of them, is scared of the knowledge, is scared of the impact they are creating to the society. They are scared, you know? And until we are free, where we have our own labs, we are doing our own tests, we are coming up with our own medicine, we are not yet free. And guys, make sure you don't get the Africa fatigue. Please, don't get the Africa fatigue. Because sometimes when you go through this Africa and you realize how much potential we have and how much of it keeps going to waste, how much we are giving away, you know you can decide, by the way, I don't want to do this thing anymore. But don't get that Africa fatigue. Keep fighting, keep asking the right questions, keep inventing, you know. Keep experimenting with our leaves and our roots, anything. At least we have that, and that grows naturally. So I don't know what your thoughts are on today's conversation, but if there's one take home is that we've never been independent. We have never. We had a crisis called COVID. You saw what happened to us. And I can't see African presidents coming together and asking, what's next? What if we are hit with this thing again? Where do we go? No, they are busy now. It's climate crisis. Our presidents are just here concentrating on carbon credits. As if we die, we die. They will not sponsor research. They will not do anything. They are busy going where the money is. So let's stay woke, guys. Let's stay woke. No one is coming to save us. As we are just lab rats, they go make the medicine and then they ship, and then you guys, you buy, and you keep making them rich, and their children keep going to good schools. Well, yours is just here struggling because, again, you refused even to eat and drink the leaves that your ancestors were using because someone told you that is primitive. That is witchcraft. These people knew why they called it witchcraft and primitive. They knew what they were planting in our minds. Guys, me have been scared of those meeting Idawa to Vibandas for a long time. I would see them in our estates and I would actually automatically say, uyo ni mganga. You know those guys who are mixing herbal medicines and you go and you buy? Miti ni shamba. It's actually miti ni shamba or something. Me, I used to be scared of those guys, Mayo. I used to be so scared. And I used to think they are, witches. Those are witches. And if I even try to look inside, I'll die. God will punish me. I used to be so scared. So don't be scared. Keep inventing. And keep researching and keep asking these questions. And I really do appreciate you for tuning in. As always, I live for your comments, guys. I love when I go on the comment section and I just check you guys and I see we are interacting and we are sharing. So I appreciate you. And I also want to say thank you to the 1.41 million subscribers. I don't know who came with this. I don't know who came with this notion that we are not, we are falling. Falling, you, where? Look at you all shining, making us the #1 YouTube platform by a female in Kenya. That is not a flex. That is me saying thank you. I appreciate you. I honor you, honestly. Continue sharing this with people across Africa. Let the motherland awaken, because there's something amazing that is waiting for us on the other side. Sovereignty. Alrighty? That's me today. And I also want to say thank you for your contribution towards independent journalism. Thank you for genuinely contributing towards this work. The research can be intensive. I always say you get to see me in front of the camera, but it takes a lot of people to be able to put this together. So I appreciate you. There's an MPESA number right there. We have a PayBill account, our PayPal. The Super Thanks is also there. You people are using Super Thanks, so I appreciate. I see it's working. So continue supporting us and continue just sharing this work. Even if you're not able to support financially, share this work so that we can continue awakening one another. All right? My name is Lynn Ngugi. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.